Well, for more, we're joined by Douglas Herbert from our International Affairs Desk. As you could hear, Doug, Iran high in the minds of both leaders. We'll hear from the French president in a moment. We also saw that hug when Yair Lapid arrived.
This is a change in the tone and the tenor of the Franco-Israeli relationship, in a sense, because, look, in a sense, this is the accidental prime minister who's here, because originally this visit was supposed to be by Naftali Bennett, the now former prime minister whose government collapsed.
It was planned a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, his government collapsed last week amid infighting, defections, and as a result, there was already a rotation agreement in place between these two. Yair Lapid took to the helm, and now France was first on his agenda, so he sort of replaced Bennett. But, they are night and day leaders in a sense. Lapid compared to Bennett. Bennett was sort of the ultra radical right in Israel, hard tied himself to a lot of the ultra right religious parties in Israel. Yair Lapid is a centrist if ever there was one. In this sense, he's political bed brothers with Macron, in the sense that they're both of the same centrist mold. Obviously, centrist means different things in the context of their respective countries. But you do have this sense that at least, and we heard it just there when they were speaking about the Iran deal, because obviously this visit comes against the backdrop of very pressing talks down to the wire to see whether or not the original Iran deal can be revived by a bunch of European powers, Iran with, and they're sort of with the U.S. sort of in between, but not directly taking part. And what you have with Lapid is he's opposed to going back, reviving the original deal known as the JCPOA, absolutely dead set against it. Iran is still enemy number one, and he's made that very clear. It's Israel's biggest threat, and he said that in his first days in office. However, where he is very different from Naftali Bennett, his predecessor, is, and you heard him there saying, he is open to the idea of a different type, a retweaked agreement, a tougher agreement that would take into consideration what he sees as Iran's belligerent activities throughout the region, its ballistic missile development, a lot of the things that are on a lot of the Western leaders' list as well. They don't see eye to eye quite on how tough that new accord should be, but it's definitely someplace where they can, they're more on the same page as the previous Israeli prime minister.
Right, and the French president saying he'd like to see a return to a modified version of that deal.
Parmi les nombreuses crises,
among the many crises affecting Israel's interests, as well as French-European security interests, is the Iranian nuclear program. I would like to bring negotiations to a successful conclusion and return to the JCPOA. I agree with Israel that the deal will not be enough. But I am certain that Iran's nuclear threshold is still more dangerous.
Je ne peux que constater.
I can only note that Iran refuses to reach a successful deal.
De conclure un bon accord.
And the French president stating that there seems to be this kind of window of opportunity. We heard the same thing from the EU foreign policy chief this Tuesday, and that that window of opportunity may or may not be closing. I don't know if that's bargaining.
It may or may not be closing, because obviously Iran has drawn a very firm red line that, lift the sanctions first, and then we can, pin down this agreement, dot the I's and cross the T's. Look, this is, in a sense, what both leaders are referring to. This is a warm-up visit, if you will, for Yair Lapid, because in 8 days, obviously, he's going to have Joe Biden, paying a visit to him. And that's going to be the first real big act, if you will, in his premiership. And that's where the real big issues of his premiership. And remember, it's only going to be 5 months, potentially, because November 1st, Israelis go back to the polls to elect new prime minister. But you're going to have not just the Iran issue looming extremely large over that visit. You're going to have the future of the cooperation, going back to the Abraham Accords from 2020, in that region. The famous normalization, as you call it, of relations between Israel, between Bahrain, between the United Arab Emirates. This would all have been unheard of a couple of years ago. And now it's all, it's almost become mainstream in the political discourse. And who's out of the equation? Well, the Palestinians are sort of out there on the sidelines. They're not sort of a part of that equation when you talk about the Abraham Accords. But along with that, also, the U.S. has been very much, and this is a big agenda item, very much involved in helping Israel and Lebanon to try to mediate some sort of agreement over a disputed sea border, their maritime border. And that's important because in the days leading up to this visit, Israel shot down 3 surveillance drones that Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group, had attempted to send to an oil rig just off in that region, a contested oil rig. It all ties in, right? Because that oil rig potentially could be the source of energy that Israel could ship to Egypt, and Egypt then could ship back to Europe for refining. So complex geopolitics here, but a lot of very heavy and weighty issues on the agenda.
Many thanks, Douglas Herbert.